Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for attending. I'm Scott at Chief Architect, and we're here today to talk about roof framing. You may notice my occasional assistant, Maya, here. She just got her hair cut, so she's a little bit cold. Also on today's webinar are a number of Chief Architect staff members to keep an eye on me and also to answer your questions. I'm first going to go through my presentation and probably take me about 20 minutes. During that time, you can chat your questions into the staff. And then following my presentation, you can unmute your microphone, raise your hand, and we'll call on you. Today's session will be recorded and we'll be sending that out as well as a survey. We greatly appreciate any feedback you can offer to us. With that, let me switch over here and we'll get started.
In this roof framing session, I'm going to cover both stick and truss framing. For truss framing, we'll look at a cantilevered energy heel truss, the different truss types and options available, how to do a truss overbuild, and modify the truss profile. Finally, we'll cover adding purlins to the roof framing. Let's start with stick framing. The program provides an automatic roof framing feature that quickly frames the roof according to the structural members defined when building the roof. This can be a great way to visually present the project even though truss framing is commonly used. Let's look at the process to stick frame our bachelor view sample plan. Creating the framing first begins when you build and define the roof. The basics include the pitch, type of framing, overhang, and roof height. In the roof options for control of the eaves, and then the roof structure. In the structure panel, there are options to have the framing auto-generate as your roof changes. A framing reference marker that specifies the starting point for the layout of your framing. You can specify the rafter and lookout spacing as well as the style for the roof blocking. The roof layer section defines the makeup of the roof components. For the surface, you can see the top layer is standing seam metal roofing, underlayment, and then the sheathing. New in Chief Architect X13 is the option to add purlins, insulation, and an air gap. I'll cover adding purlins later in the session. The roof structure has a 2x12 I-joist. There are several types of framing members available, and again, new in Chief Architect X13 are the layers for insulation and an air gap. For the roof sizing, you can define the sizes for the various framing members of the roof. Note, for the rafter, it's defined above in the roof's structure layer. Once all of the attributes of the roof are defined, you can frame the roof using the automatic option here, or under the Build Framing menu. First, I'll delete the roof framing. Under the Edit menu, under Delete Objects, I'm going to come down and delete the roof framing. Once the framing is removed, from the Build Framing menu in the Roof panel, which mirrors the same options from the Roof dialog, there's an automatic Build Framing and a one-time Build option. As I select the one-time Build option, the program generates the roof framing as it has been defined in the roof structure. This is an efficient way to visually display and generate the roof framing. All of the automatic generated framing here can be manually adjusted to your project's needs, such as creating a copy of this rafter. In the 2D framing view, you can manually draw a new rafter. It will come in at the correct elevation and pitch. And you can also create roof blocking. Roofs can be framed individually. In this remodel example, I can frame the new roof by selecting both roof planes. Then, in my lower Edit menu, you'll see an option to build the framing for these roofs. You might notice that I used a line style and material for the new construction that differs from the existing construction. Let's move on and take a look at truss framing for roofs. You can manually generate trusses for your designs. You may find you want to draw a few trusses for a section view or to help your truss manufacturer better understand your construction needs. If you choose, you can manually truss your entire design as I have open in our Grand View sample plan. The trusses in Chief Architect will not be engineered to any particular specifications, and that must be performed by your structural engineer or your truss company. For the truss example, let's start by creating this energy heel cantilevered style truss. I've already created 4 walls. The first thing I'm going to do is build the roof. Up in the build menu, I'm going to come down to the roof, build roof. I'm going to mark that the roofs will be automatically rebuilt. As we change any walls, the roof will adjust. The roof pitch, 8 and 12, I'm going to mark that it's using trusses. The roof overhang, off plate height, leave that at 0. And this is the area right down in here that we'll be adjusting for the trusses. I'm going to uncheck the automatic bird's mouth, and after we generate the roof, I'm going to come back and adjust the off plate amount once we determine in a section view what that amount should be. On the options panel, I'm just going to use a boxed eave that's flush, and then on the structure panel, let's take a look. I'm going to come down, I'm going to accept the spacing. The roof layers is using a 2x12. This isn't relevant for a truss, so I'll disregard it. And really, one of the things that I'm going to focus on is the gable subfascia. This is going to be a 2x8 out at the end of the truss. That will predicate the distance for the triangle of the cantilever of the truss. Let's go ahead and build our roof. And then I'm going to come up, I'm going to use the back clip cross-section camera. Let's create a small slice right through the middle of the house. Now as I zoom in, just using the scroll wheel on my mouse, what I want to do is I want to figure out what the distance is between the soffit and the top of the plate. That will be the distance that I need to raise the roof off the plate. To make it easy to do that measurement, I'm just going to use the line tool. I'm going to come down, I'm going to snap onto the top of the plate. Let's just draw a line out. Then I'm going to use the dimension tool. Specifically, I'm going to use the point-to-point dimension tool. I'm going to come down, click on the soffit, come up, click on the line. If we zoom out just a little bit, you can see that dimension is 1 foot 1 1/4. And specifically what I'm going to do, let's highlight the point. I'm going to click on the dimension. I'm going to copy this value to raise off the plate. Control C or Command C on the keyboard. Let's go back in, build our roof. Underneath the build menu, come down, build roof. I'm going to go back into the area for the automatic bird mouth cut. And I'm going to paste that value that we just created in that dimension. As we make that change, we zoom out. You can see that the roof is now sitting on top of the plate and is ready for the truss. Just simply delete that dimension. Let's go over into our floor plan and then over to our roof tools. I'm going to select the roof truss tool. Let's go ahead and draw this right through the intersection. Then let's tile our screens, Shift F6 on the keyboard. You can see we've generated the energy heel style cantilevered truss. And right in this area right here is where the subfascia will show up when we build it. You can always, if you want to see it, just draw a CAD box in there to generate it. Now before I generate the entire framing, one of the things that I like to do sometimes is to use a framing reference marker. From our plan view, let's come up into our build framing menu, and I'm going to use the framing reference marker, and I'm just going to use this and snap on to the corner down here. If you're interested what these do, it controls the layout, the rollout of your framing. You can then click on your framing truss. There is an option in the lower edit menu to then move that to the framing reference. That's going to basically control it. So when I make many copies of the trusses, it's using that for the initial rollout. To fill the rest of the structure with trusses, I'm just going to use the multiple copy tool. Come down in my lower edit menu, click on the multiple copy, click on the interval. Trusses are typically copied at 24 inches. You can put in a value that you need to right in here. When I have that set up, I'm going to use the multiple copy. We'll slide the copies down. Notice how that shows up right on that framing reference. We'll do the same thing on this side. We'll use the multiple copy. The interval's already set at 24 inches. We'll just slide that down towards the end. And now we've filled the structure with all of our trusses. Let's go ahead and take a 3D view using a specific camera we have for framing overview. and you can see the entire structure with the trusses. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the two end trusses. I'm just going to hold my Shift key down, grab both of these trusses. I'm going to open them up. And then underneath the truss information, I'm going to mark that these are end trusses, so they will frame differently. And I'm also going to use the reduce gable. That way we can do a framing lookout when we do the rest of the framing. And I might also just mark that they will be forced to be rebuilt when we select that. And now you can see that it created a different framing style for the trusses. You go back in here and let's just take a look at the rest of the truss styles that you can use. You can use a king truss. You can force it to be an end truss as we just did, energy heel truss, drop hip truss, attic truss, and a sloping flat truss. A few other things, you can force the truss to rebuild. If you're changing the envelope of a ceiling or a roof, you may need to force the rebuild of the truss. There may be situations where you edit the truss and you want to lock the envelope and the webbing. And then no special snapping. If you've got a condition where you're trying to drag your trusses out, it's crossing a roof plane, you may find that no special snapping may help you in doing that. Also for your trusses, the default that I'm using, you can specify the chord information, top, bottom, webbing, and then your span information for how these are going to be generated. Let's look at the situation where we want to create a tray ceiling and change the way that that truss is being built. In the floor plan view, I'm going to go ahead and click inside this room. I'm going to select the tray ceiling tool. You'll find that down in my lower edit menu. I want to generate a tray ceiling. In this case, let's just use some of the information in here, the width of the tray, the depth of the tray, recessed into the ceiling, and then the default pitch is at 8 and 12. Let's go ahead and generate this ceiling. All of the trusses in the middle of the design will need to be regenerated. I'm just going to use the truss tool, click on it. I'm going to hold my Shift key down. I'm going to click and drag around all the trusses that need to be regenerated. I'll double click to open them up. I'm going to force the rebuild. That will regenerate it based on that ceiling platform. Let's go back in and take a look at that in our section view. The trusses will follow your ceilings whether you've created a tray or a vault. You will have to force them to be rebuilt if you draw them after the fact. All of these trusses envelopes can be modified. If I click on this truss, notice that there is a polyline indicated by each one of these diamonds. You can actually come in here and modify this. If you pull it up, you can see that we've generated it. My section's cutting back through there. Let's just adjust it so we're looking at one of the trusses. Let's just pull that back, go back into that view. So the envelope of the truss can be modified and you can create different shapes of your trusses depending on what your needs are. One advanced feature in addition to that, if you tap on the truss, you can come down and there is an option to open the truss, and this would allow you to add additional framing members in here. Be very careful, this is powerful but can affect your trusses. Let me close this detail. Let's go back into our section. I'm just simply going to open this truss up and I'm going to force it to be rebuilt. Notice that it has a lock on it. I'm going to remove the lock. We'll rebuild the truss so that it comes back into the tray ceiling. Now one of the things I want to take a look at, if we go back into the 3D view, I might want to put a pop out or a bump out for new construction or a model. When I do this, I want the trusses to ride up over the top of those existing trusses. Let's move over into the floor plan and let's look at the steps to do this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my automatic roof tool. I don't want this existing roof plane to be changed. In my roof, I'm going to come in and turn off the automatic roofs. Step number one. Step number two, when I build the roof again, I want to make sure that these roof planes don't get edited. So I'm going to select both of them, open them up. You'll see a message that since we've moved the roof planes, it's giving us a message about that. I'm going to mark them as edited roof planes. We'll see how that can be controlled when we rebuild the roof after we add this bump out. So I'm going to come over with the wall tool and we'll just kind of come in here and we'll just add a small bump out right roughly in this region right here. Pull it up just a little bit so it's a little more symmetrical. I'm going to take the end wall, mark it as a gable wall, and then we're going to go back in, build the roof. When I do this one-time build, I'm going to mark that I'm going to retain those edited roof planes. That will generate the roof. You can see that it's pulling back into this area. Let's take a look at adding our truss. I'm going to come down, grab our truss tool. Let's draw a truss across here. Let's use the multiple copy and generate this and see what happens when we drag the trusses up and over that area. You're going to notice that the program says that it can't find a ceiling plane or they're too close together to make the truss. And what's happening here is we have two roofs that are competing. The program doesn't know what to do. I need to create what's called a truss base to help the program understand when I do this operation. Let me just close this, click on Do one time so that we stop the generation of those trusses. And what I'm going to do is come underneath my Build menu, down underneath Build Roof, and you're going to find the option to create a truss base. So let's go ahead and come down here, and we'll adjust this after we get going here, but let's just kind of come down, click on this area, and click up slope. We'll click on the peak, turn that layer on, and then let's go ahead and zoom in and make some adjustments. I'm going to take this truss base, I'm going to pull this point and snap it onto our point for the roof. Let's do the same thing over here. Let's pull that in, click on the point for the roof, and then I'm just going to pull this down until it snaps out onto the bigger roof plane. And then we'll also make some adjustments so that it snaps down at each end of that roof plane. This is called a truss base, and the first thing that I need to do with this truss base is make it coplanar to the larger roof that it's sitting on. While this truss base is selected, you're going to see a tool to make this coplanar down in the lower edit menu. And I'll hover over this for just a minute. It's called Move to be Coplanar. When I select this option, I'm going to then click until the larger roof plane that I want it to be coplanar is highlighted. Then I'll click. I now know that that's coplanar with the bigger roof plane. Let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit. Select our truss, use the multiple copy tool. Let's go ahead and slide that up so the truss is right up there. And now you can see that it rode up. Let's take a 3D view. And then as we rotate around, you can see that the trusses have now ridden up and stacked on top of those existing trusses. Let me go back into the floor plan view. I'm going to make one more copy of the truss on the end, and then we'll complement the stick framing and fill out the rest of the framing for the project. So back over into the floor plan view, I'm going to grab this truss here, make a copy of it, slide it to the end of the wall, and I'll take and open up that truss, mark it as an end truss. That's a reduced gable. Mark that it's going to be a force rebuild, and then let's go into the 3D view and take a look. So you can see that we've generated all of the framing for the trusses, and now to fill in the fascia and the other components, let's go into our Build Framing menu, come down to the roof section, and then I'm just going to check the one-time build roof framing. You'll see the framing automatically fill in anything that wasn't already created. And you can see that the framing now looks pretty good based on using both trusses and stick framing to generate this. In this last example, let's look at a new feature we have introduced in Chief Architect X13 for purlin framing. Inside of the Build Roof dialog, underneath the roof layers in the structure area, specifically for the surface, you'll see two layers. The first layer is our roofing material. The next layer is for framing. This is marked as a purlin. It's 1.5 inches in thickness. And then you can see the on-center spacing as it slides up the roof is set at 24 inches. And then I defined the width of it to be 3.5 inches. In addition, there are options to add an insulation and air gap for your roof framing. These new added layers make it an easy process to create roof framing with purlins. As I wrap up this session and return back to the Grand View sample plan with full truss framing, notice in the project browser as I open up this truss detail view, you'll see all of the truss profiles being used in the plan. Any one of these trusses you can select, then using the Find in Plan feature we can identify exactly where that truss in this case, is being used inside of the plan. So this is a nice way to track down exactly where each one of those trusses is being used. That wraps up this session on roof and truss framing. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Okay, well, some exciting stuff coming in Chief Architect X13. And then as we're getting ready to answer our questions here, you'll find the raise hand option in your GoToMeeting control panel. When you raise your hand, unmute your mic, and then we'll call on you. So Carrie, do we have some questions out there?
Yes, we have a question from Larry Haas. Hi, Larry. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, hey guys. Hi, Scott. Excellent again. And thank you as always. Quick question for you. I don't see it illustrated on the framing here. I don't know how to illustrate it necessarily, but I think typically when we frame and we choose a fascia or a fascia color, that fascia color seems to promote itself through all the framing that it's attached to. Is that still the case? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I believe you're correct. If I can grab one of the roof panels down here and just open it up. Let's see if we can open this and go into the structure or materials. And we come down here and we're looking for a fascia.
Yeah, I see it as deep
silver. And yeah, well, maybe I'll just pause here, see if there's any chief staff members, if that looks accurate. Maybe that's the case.
I thought that deep silver kind of propagated through all the framing.
Yeah, it doesn't appear to. Let's take a look. Let's switch to our project browser or layer display. Let's switch this to our normal 3D view. So it looks like I do have control over that fascia color in this case, individually. And you're right, if you go into the roof panel, it looks like it's right there, Larry, with the fascia control right in here.
Yeah, okay. Maybe, I'm not sure what condition I'm thinking of, but it seemed as though as soon as I colored the fascia X, it would propagate through the framing, but maybe it's no longer the case, or I'm just kind of dreaming.
No, I've seen a situation where it has propagated, but I too don't recall the use case of that. I don't, if anybody else knows differently, they can jump out here and talk about that.
I was just going to mention that I think there has been a case for the material question where if you have exposed rafter tails, then the exposed color often goes all the way through the framing member. That might be the case.
Okay.
Just one comment, Scott.
Oh, yeah.
The energy heal, of all the things that Chief does automatically, it's kind of surprising that we need to find that value and copying and pasting it instead of a checkbox that says, please put the bottom of the truss at the top of the plate.
Sure. There's actually been an interesting thread out there on Chief Talk about that. We certainly read that thread and are aware of it. Thanks, Larry, for calling in. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Scott, we have a question from Vicky. Hey, Vicky, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, Scott. I have a couple of things. One, how do you set it up if you're going to have, say, have a craftsman style and you're going to have your 2x12 rafters with no fascia? Every time I try to do that, I can't seem to eliminate the fascia and the subfascia.
Well, let's take a look. So in this example here, I just framed one roof panel, right? As we kind of rotate around, I don't have the fascia on that panel. Is that kind of what you're looking at, Vicky?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. But when you're in the structure part of the roof, if you try to switch them all off, they don't. They come back at maybe a 1/16 of an inch or something like that.
Well, let's take a look. Let's move over into the floor plan view for this roof. So here's the roof section that we were just looking at over here. I'll highlight it. Go ahead and open it up by double clicking on it. And over in the structure panel, what I've done in this case, since we have exposed rafter tails, is I've unchecked the eave subfascia.
Okay.
And so when I rebuild that, let's go ahead and just throw it on there. And then if I rebuild this roof panel and we zoom in, you see it appear in this 2D view, right?
Right.
And of
But you
course, it
can't
would
do that
change.
for the
Here's your
gable
color,
end and
Larry.
just have a single barge rafter instead of a sub-fascia.
So you want to control it for, let's go ahead and go back
For
in
the
here.
gable end as well.
So let's remove that fascia back off of there. And let's just uncheck it, gable fascia. So I've got
The
the
gable
gable,
sub-fascia doesn't have a selection box.
right, but I think you could zero that out. You want to remove it?
Yeah, so you just have the one member, your ending barge trim.
Okay, well, let's, I haven't done this, but if we go in here and zero it out, I don't know what will happen. I haven't done it, but let's see what happens.
You get
It
1/16 of an inch.
It forces it to be a 16th, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And so your request here would like to have an option like we do on the eave subfascia to remove it.
yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
You know, you
Well,
don't
we'll make,
necessarily use it all the time, but there's some times where you don't want both a fascia and a subfascia, just depending
yeah,
on
okay,
how you're doing it. Okay. Then I
okay,
have another question
okay.
about the energy heel trusses. We do energy heel trusses sometimes that aren't necessarily cantilevered. They're going to have
Sure.
a sloped overhang.
So something like
And
the far right side of my screen over here?
yes, exactly. Now,
Yeah.
the truss company that I use, unless you specify a certain height for your purposes, they tend to do a raised heel that allows there to be just a 2x12 for blocking. So the raised heel is going to be give or take 12 inches, 11 1/4, 12 inches. But
Right.
they measure it from the bottom of the truss to the top of the top cord.
Okay,
Chief measures it to the underside of the top
Okay.
cord.
right,
So I have to go through and figure out, okay, what's my vertical distance of the member and what's, subtract that from 12. And then I go and I use it on the raise the roof part, not the bird's mouth part. And
Right.
sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Hmm.
So that would be, I guess, a feature request that it gets measured to the top of the cord.
right. So you want to measure from bottom of plate up to the very top.
Top of cord. Yeah.
Sure,
That way I
Okay.
don't have to do all those conversions.
right,
It
sure.
also goes along with why do you use the bird's mouth area instead of raise the roof up area?
If we look at the option when you build your roof, specifically, I think you're asking about, we have a roof height down here, right? And there's
Yeah.
a raise and lower, and then there's a separate area down here when you're using trusses.
Yeah.
So I guess to be fair, your question is, why do we have both of those? Why can't we just use one?
Well, yeah, because like trusses, since they don't have a bird's mouth cut, I always check that off and use the roof height raise lower for my
Oh.
truss. But you didn't
Oh.
do it that way, and I'm wondering if there's a good reason to use one or the other.
Well, when you're using trusses, you definitely want to zero this out, and down here is where you're going to want to use your raise off plate for
Okay,
trusses.
why? Why is that?
That's the way that we've set it up to work. And
Okay.
so when you're using a truss, step one, make sure that you use the check mark to
Sure.
build the trusses up here. And then number two, you want to check it down here. If you're raising it up here, what's going to happen is your top of plate, I can just kind of pull that image back up here. At your top of plate, if you raise it the other way, it's actually going to pull the wall up that raise amount.
Okay,
So
okay.
you're going to have a little, what I call a little stub wall
Yeah.
in there. And you could do a test case.
Yeah, you're
And-
absolutely right.
And so there are conditions when people want to do that. But in the case of a truss, you're typically using that truss and the energy heel out of the truss to raise it up. And so when you're using the program to do trusses, check the trusses, leave your raise off roof height, because that's going to change your wall height.
Okay.
And
Okay,
down
that makes a
here,
lot of sense.
yep, and then down here in the automatic bird's mouth cut is where you want to put the value that you're going to raise off plate.
Yeah, and that's
that
exactly
way
what's
you're,
happening is I've been getting those little stubby walls. Okay.
yeah,
Oh, I haven't been using the reduced gable on the truss because
sure.
it ends up creating something weird at the eave overhang that doesn't
Okay.
match with
Okay.
the other.
Okay, let me see if I can take a quick peek at that. I have seen that. Okay, so in this case, if we zoom in here and I tap on the end truss and we look at it, it's an end truss, it's a reduced gable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the roof plane itself, let's just kind of see what I have going. And we go in here, and for the condition for the lookout, I have it as a 2x6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at this in the 3D view, let's just take a peek at it. So this is the example that we just used that I framed. And maybe it'll be easier if I take a section. Let's cut or just pull a new section right through here and take a look at it. Let's see if I understand what you're talking about. So I'm just going to cut a very small section right through here. So you can see where our blocking is, how it comes in there. And then if we go back and we pull that camera one more truss, so we see both trusses. Let's take a peek. And that's
Okay.
where that reduced gable comes in with that blocking.
Okay, mine hasn't necessarily been working out that way, but it's probably operator error.
Well, be sure in your roof setting itself, if I can tap back on that roof, grab it. Make sure you have your structure components, because when you do your framing, it's going to follow the envelope of your roof. So part of that's making sure you have your structure. And I typically will take those lookouts and I will twist them. The default may come in just the opposite of this. So the stud is twisted 90 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And I've changed mine to go so that it's flat in this case, and that's why it's generating it down 1.5 inches, because that's what it's going to force it down to, is
Sure.
1.5 inches in this case. So just check
That's
that when
how
you
they're
do it.
usually built. Yeah. Okay. When you were showing the truss base, because it
Mhm.
was an addition, you
Mhm.
extended your truss base out to include the eave overhang of the trusses.
Mhm.
If you're doing like all new roof, you just bring that truss base to the end of the wall,
Mhm.
and then the tails don't show, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it, Scott. Thank you for all the time.
You bet.
Thank you, Scott. We have a question from John. Hi, John. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I have an issue with exposed rafters, viewing
Okay.
exposed rafters. For example, when you're framing a house and you're using, like Chief has that default now of 2x12 rafters, and oftentimes the tails are exposed. What I'm trying to do is get it to display properly, which is a struggle in X12, so that I can see the rafter tails as they would normally be cut. They're reduced from 2x12s down to 2x6 or 2x4, and Chief does something odd or funny when you check and uncheck the soffit box in order to view them.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just end up with this open cavity you're viewing.
Okay.
It doesn't look quite right. So I'm wondering if X13 has got more features for the, without having to create a custom rafter tail, basically.
Mhm. Well, John, I'm not sure that we've made a significant change in the way rafter tails work with respect to roofs. One of the things that we have done is we've enabled it to work on non-rafter members. Take our overview here. You can change rafter tails or exposed tails on other items. So if you kind of zoom in here and you look at the trellis here, that's just a general framing member. That is new, but when you expose your rafter tails, you know, if you want that member to change where it's exposed from the eave out and
Yes.
you've removed your soffit, I can't change the framing member depth. What I can do is build my own rafter profile that would go from a 2x12 maybe to, I'm just looking to see if I have, I don't know if I have one here.
You're talking about the custom Rafter Tails.
Yeah, and
Yep.
so if we
No,
took
Chief already does this. Chief does
Yeah.
cut them down
right,
based on the soffit, and I think it's a subfascia depth. It's got some formula where it's automatically cutting them down to either 2x4 or 2x6, but
Mhm.
it's how it's displayed. If you look at a 3D view when you're looking up underneath it, it's
Mhm.
basically how it's displayed at that plate line
Mhm.
up
Okay.
top. Just the odd way in which it cuts off the 2x12 into
Mhm.
something smaller.
So you'd rather see it cut something like that when you do it?
Yes, something like that. It currently does something like that, but the display is really wonky.
Okay. Well, if you send your plan and we take a look at it and maybe send an image in of what you're looking at specifically, and
Mhm.
maybe we can better look at it and perhaps make an improvement in there.
Yeah, because I've tried doing the custom tails like you said, but you have to do one for each slope.
Okay, yeah, because you wanted it at an exact 90 degree.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. So then it gets a little more complicated.
So you would like a parametric approach when your roof pitch changes from 6 or 8 or 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Chief
Yep.
already does this about 90%. And it's
Mhm.
just that last 10% that it visually doesn't
Sure.
display correctly.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
You bet.
Scott, we have a question from Elvin. Hi, Elvin. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello. Every truss plant we've ever worked with throughout Oregon, maybe they all use MyTex plates or something, but the measurement is to the bottom of roof sheathing or top of the top cord to top plate. And then they want us to go through the plan and identify that on every truss. Well, the truss profiles pop up nicely. There isn't any auto dimension or a way without doing CAD lines to be able to throw a dimension on there to show them those heel heights
Mhm.
everywhere. That would be a wonderful tool. That would be awesome. But one of
Okay.
the other things that we've been running into, I really love the purlin options you're talking about in the next version, because boy, we've fought with that. I just finished a project, let's say where your trusses that you're showing in that view, if those would have been beams, we run big beams, you know, every 8 or 10 feet, and they extend out to create the overhangs. Maybe we're missing something, but how can I have like a square cut at the eave and a plumb cut at the ridge on a beam that sticks through? Is there any controls for that? Because they sure don't look right in the 3D when we.
Yeah. So the beam currently is basically going to follow whatever your roof is set up. And your roof, you can't by edge choose plumb and square. So one of the things you could do is in your elevation view, once you've drawn your beam in there, just trace over that with a polyline solid. Polyline solid, you could modify it to be any shape you want. So in one case it's square, in one place it's plumb.
And then we'd have to do the same thing for our fascia boards and.
Well, yeah, it gets more complicated, but that feature, we'll make sure we log it. We don't support it today. So currently the roof, when you are building it, as you already know, it sounds like, you can only choose either plumb or square. If you don't want to do the entire house, you could just take a small section right through one of those beams, create your polyline solid, and then you could just remove the fascia off there, draw that in with a polyline solid, just in that one section view, so you have that view. You wouldn't have to repeat that or extrude that for the entire design if you didn't want to. So that'd be pretty quick to do that. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it's a fully manual.
It would be, because you're trying to get 2 different edges on each roof plane.
Yeah, appreciate it. And again, love these weekly programs. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for calling in.
Scott, we have a question from John Paul. Hi, John Paul. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. Hi, Scott. Yeah,
Hi, John.
we end up often incorporating our exposed eaves and doing some certain things in our trusses. So we end up having our truss tails, our truss manufacturer actually put the tails essentially in the truss for us.
Okay.
Right now, all we're doing, and maybe there's no, I mean, honestly, this is very particular, but right now all we're doing is just doing it manually. Do you have any idea how that might be done differently? I just wanted to see if there was something you knew of that.
Yeah, so our truss that we build doesn't have an option to put a profile on the end of the truss. And if I just kind of zoom in off the side over here, sounds like you'd be taking this area off to the right-hand side and putting a profile on it. We don't currently support the ability to put a profile on there. And, you know, I think the way there, I mean, you could open up the truss and modify it, but that would be quite a bit of work. I might just chop the truss off at the end here and then use a multiple copy with a little rafter that already has that profile on there.
Yeah.
And then you could see it in 3D and you could see it in your section view. Might be one way to do it.
Oh yeah, I guess I guess that's a good way to, if I had a rafter tail. Could a rafter exist just in the eave? I guess that's okay.
It should be able to. Yeah.
That actually would be faster. Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's check in with Brandon. Hi, Brandon. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hey there. So trying to do like a conservatory and trying to use the roof framing to make, you know, like a glass roof conservatory where you have exposed members, but yet still have walls being looking like walls.
So one of the things you can do, I just opened up an example with a simple roof on here. And this is a SIP roof, right? So if you're gonna make your glass, what are those, maybe 3/8, ½ inch? One possible approach is we just open up this roof, we go into the structure, and on the surface panel, if I come in here and I just kind of delete the rest of these components out of the SIP panel, we set our roof to be a ½ inch and just say that it's a ½ inch of glass.
Yeah, it makes sense. It doesn't seem to really work that way, but even more than that would be, hey, look, I don't care if there's glass there or not.
Okay.
It's really just, I can take the framing members, make them white or black to represent the members of the sunroom system. And I want to see walls in standard perspective cameras. I want to see the floors. I want to see the terrain. I want to see everything. I want to see the house as the house is, but I only want to see the roof be the framing.
Well, I think what you're asking for is doable, and I see no reason why you couldn't do it.
We have a couple more questions. Here's Larry with a question. Hi, Larry. Go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, hey, Scott. I discovered how the rafters turn into the fascia color.
Okay.
If anybody's interested, if you delete the soffits, the rafter color, whatever the fascia color, and the rafter tails take over the entire framing. Real world, the fascia and the rafter tails are painted basically, right? If there's no soffit. And then the rest of sounds like a pretty heavy lift actually for programming. Then the rest of the rafter is the fur framing color.
Right. Okay.
So, and that last user, if he were to put air gap layers on every part of his roof except for the framing, then he would just see the framing and all the walls in a 3D overview perspective.
Right.
There'd be nothing on the top, nothing on the bottom. He would just have framing exposed.
Yeah.
And all the walls showing. I think that's what he was asking for.
Great. Thanks for the tip on that.
All right. See you later.
Okay. See you, Larry.
Scott, if you want to make any announcements, I think we've gotten to everybody.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Carrie. And thanks everybody for attending today. We have a few training classes coming up, and if we kind of scroll down on the main website, you're going to find our schedule underneath the live webinars and training. And one of the things we're doing on this Friday is we have a free Chief Boot Camp. If you're new or wanting to learn a little bit more about the basics of the program, this session is going to be on Friday the 13th. Don't let that scare you off. 10 a.m. on Pacific time. Next week, we're going to be taking a look at wall framing. We have a lot of changes that we've made to wall framing to make some improvements in the way the program works, and we'll be doing that next Thursday at noon. And there's a sign up button right down here. Take advantage of that. And then we're going to be doing a full training class. These are 4-hour sessions over a course of 4 days. We have the intro, intermediate, and kitchen and bath course. Those will start in the latter part of January, 1st of February for kitchen and baths. And then we've got some additional training seminars that aren't quite up on the website yet. Those will be on the Thursdays in December. So stay tuned. We'll have those up in the next week or so. If you get our email with a link to the recording today, take a moment, review it, and also fill out the survey. Have a wonderful day, and thanks everybody for attending.